Is Mike Collette. I am the owner and head coach of CrossFit Prototype located in Westborough, Massachusetts. And I wanted to go through a double under progression video for you with some of the techniques and tips that I've used with our athletes and members at our facility. Now, this is version 2. I've created a double under progression video in the past, around 4 years ago, but gives a little bit more depth to some of the things we've learned over the past few years. Now, the double under is one of those movements that can be extremely frustrating for your athletes and even for yourself if you struggle with this movement. So hopefully some of these tips and cues are effective. So I'm just going to kind of play a little recording of what I did and gone through some of the movements and progression. So the video starts with me just doing some basic single under. So just one thing to kind of note, I'm rebounding off the ball of my foot. My elbows are slightly in, my hands are out in front of me, even though I have a lot of space between the rope and my head here, which some double under experts would probably recommend a little bit less space. For the purpose of this video, we're not going to get too much into that. But however, you notice my hands, I'm kind of moving up and down with my hands. I'm staying up nice and tall. My head gaze is forward. I'm looking up or straight out in front of me on a fixed object. Now, what we tend to see people struggle with just in the early stages of learning how to use a jump rope or relearning how to use a jump rope is that they're using a lot of shoulder and arm action to actually swing the rope. So if you look at here, my hands start to move out a little bit and I really start to go heavy with my shoulders, right? So see here, again, as you do this and move those hands out and start really using the shoulders and the arms to move the rope, you shorten up the rope, right? And especially if you're getting tired, you're trying to do these double unders, you're almost guaranteed to miss every single time, right? So we want to try to keep those elbows in nice and tight, right? And focus on the wrist. Now you see here, I'm getting really wild and jumpy, bending my knees, being a little spastic, a lot of elbow movement here. Again, bringing the arms out really wide. This is just to show some of the faults, and then you see I kind of miss, right? So again, if you notice here, I'm trying to show you elbows in, hands slightly out in front. And then, this is typically where we start a lot of people just from the early stages of how to just size up the rope and what's appropriate for them. So if you see here, I'm using what we call a speed cable rope, very thin cable. This is not the ideal jump rope to use when learning how to do double unders. You want to use something a little bit heavier. It gives you a little bit more feedback. In addition to that, the length of the rope, we want to be just under the chest line. That gives a good reference point, just like snatch grip, right? There's a point of reference or a rule of thumb. The rule of thumb that we have is just under the chest line. That has given, and we've seen some of the best results with that, but that can vary individual to individual. So as I kind of go through this, sizing up the rope, and then you'll see me just showing moving those arms out. Not that good of a thing to do. We want to keep those elbows in, moving those hands. And one cue that we like to use is holding onto the rope or holding onto the end of the handle and thinking like you have markers or dry erase markers in your hands and you're drawing lines. I also use the reference of drumsticks, and this actually becomes really effective when teaching someone the pattern of a double under and that double whip at the wrist. So I like to hold, if you kind of see here, I like to hold the very end of the handle here. I prefer the longer handles. That allows you to get a little bit more feel for the rope and more control for their athletes that might not be able to feel where the rope is in space as they're jumping. It's really important to be able to feel out the rope and be able to understand where that rope is at all times. If you're kind of guessing, say you're trying to do a double under, you get one, but you're like, oh my God, how did I do that? Chances are you don't really know where the jump rope is in space. And in order to, again, get these done effectively and be able to string them together down the road, we want to be able to understand where the rope is at all times. So again, just kind of going through, we don't want to be bending the elbows, moving too much at the shoulders. So from here, I'm going into our progression. So a progression that we like to use is really a tempo count. And what I've found really effective for people is using like 120, 130 beats per minute. So it's kind of like a 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 sort of a rebounding count on the single unders to kind of learn the tempo, right? Because that's very similar to stringing the double unders together. From there, the progression would be every fourth jump adding in a big jump. So if you notice here, 1, 2, 3, big jump, 1, 2, 3, big jump. This allows people to get an understanding for how to jump a little bit higher to be ready for that double under. Ideally, down the road, learning how to be efficient with double unders. You don't want to have to spend a lot of energy jumping super high to be able to string those together. But in the early learning stages, this is a great progression pattern. So from there, it's multiple big jumps, big jumps, big jumps, and then into the double unders. Now, it's very rare to see someone string a bunch of double unders together their first time learning how to do it. From my experience, there tends to be an evolution of what that looks like, right? So the pattern, again, singles on a tempo, singles with a big jump on a tempo, multiple big jumps on a tempo, again, focusing on what we spoke about in the early stages, head gaze forward, elbows in, hands slightly out in front, focusing on moving the wrists, not too much of the arms to move the rope. But typically, this is what we're going to see with their first double under, right? So someone gets their double under, they bend their knee, so I'll rewind that real quick so you can see. They get this big hop, and they land hard, and then they stop, and typically they're like, oh my gosh, I just got a double under, which is great, right? So we want to reinforce the idea of understanding how to move the rope fast enough first in order to get their first double under, right? And I typically don't worry too much about this because we can correct this relatively quickly, right? So it tends to look like the big jump, and then they start working back into singles, and they're kind of all over the place. So double under, big jump with the knees tucked, right? And then getting some singles in between, double under, single, still bending the knees, and then kind of like, oh, I don't really know what's going on. I'm getting some bending, still kind of going the hands out a little bit wide here, right? And then evolution, right? We posture up, being able to try to string them together. Again, might be missing on some of those double unders. You might not be unconsciously conscious at this point, right? So the stages of learning, being unconsciously incompetent, consciously competent, and then unconsciously competent with the movement. And that's where we want to get to, is not having to think about being able to actually execute on the movement pattern. And then eventually being able to string the double unders together, right? And again, if you notice here, I'm rebounding off the ball on my foot. My elbows were in, my head gaze was forward. Again, going through this movement pattern, that progression, rebounding off the ball of the foot, focusing on the hands, elbows in. We don't want to go wide with the hands. It's going to shorten the rope. Head's looking forward, right? And we're rebounding off the ball of the foot, keeping a nice controlled tempo throughout the entire movement, right? So again, just a few more double unders here. Awesome. I'm just going to pause for 1 second. So as I go through the progression with some of our clients, some of our athletes, kind of learning how to do this movement, again, like I say, I want to reinforce that it's okay to get their first double under. They land on the ground, they get it, they're excited, that's great. We want to celebrate the success there. From there, we start reworking and rewiring the movement pattern to improve it. It's just like any sort of exercise that requires coordination. Down the road, the goal is to then become as efficient as possible so you can succeed in your workouts, be able to RX those workouts with 50 to 100 double under plus volume in there. However, one of the cues that I found that's worked really, really well, and this comes from people that really don't understand how to get their wrists involved with the double under and be able to string it together efficiently, is a context cue. Now, I like to use context cues a lot with this movement in the sense of relating something that people can understand to the movement pattern. Specifically, I talk about beating eggs. So I'll say, okay, has anyone ever beat eggs before? Taken a fork, put it in a bowl, swiveled their wrist around, beat some eggs. And I always say people don't beat eggs with their shoulder and with their elbow, right? They use their wrists. So understanding that that movement is very similar, that little snap at the wrist to be able to get that jump rope going really, really fast. Now, understanding that there is a slight pause, a slight tempo change in between the double under. So it's that double under, it's snap, 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 snap. For those people that, again, struggle with understanding the wrist, being able to coordinate their feet or their legs with their upper body and with their hands, right? Those people that struggle with that and they tend to just kind of snap the rope really viciously and nothing's really getting done. Again, understanding and listening to the rope can be a great thing here. So those auditory cues, having your athletes get into a group and hear the sound of the rope and that little slight pause in between is a great way to be able to progress on the double under. And the last cue that I'm going to go through, or last thing that I found has been really successful for people, especially those that really aren't getting the speed of the hands, being able to get that double under underneath them, or being able to string, or, turn the rope over 2 times really, really quickly, is just starting off with a double under. So the rope starts behind them, and they jump, and then they try to go right into the double under. And that's a great area to practice with people if they're trying to learn the speed of their hands, right? So we start to see some of these trends with athletes, and we can deconstruct this movement pattern fairly simply, that people either struggle with coordinating their hands with their feet, understanding tempo and rhythm in terms of their jump, and or just trying to be as efficient as possible with where their hands and elbows are positioned. And for a lot of people, just learning on a heavier rope can be really helpful. I found that it's also helpful for people to hold on to the end of the rope to be able to feel as much weight in that rope as possible. So again, looking at some double unders, starting out with singles, right, and then bringing it into the ability to string together multiple double unders. Hope this video helps.